In the dead of night, when most people are lost in dreams, some face their worst nightmares. What would you do if armed men broke into your home, threatening everything you hold dear? Most would freeze in terror. Some would fight and fail. But one woman turned a moment of complete helplessness into a masterclass of survival that military experts still study today. This isn't a movie. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of how a single mother, stripped of her weapon and outnumbered 4-1 by trained commandos, used nothing but her mind, her training, and 79 seconds to change everything. By the time the smoke cleared, for highly trained soldiers lay defeated, and the woman they underestimated was still standing. What happened in those 79 seconds didn't just save a life. It rewrote the rules of combat, challenged everything experts thought they knew about human capability under extreme stress, and proved that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the one you can hold in your hands. This is her story. Sarah Chin never intended to become a legend. At 32, she lived a quiet life in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, working as a software engineer by day and raising her 8-year-old daughter Emma as a single mother. To her neighbors, she was just another working mom trying to make ends meet. They had no idea that Sarah carried secrets from a past life that she'd worked hard to leave behind. Born in Taiwan to a family with deep military traditions, Sarah had been different from other children. While her classmates played with dolls and video games, she was learning ancient martial arts from her grandfather, a former special forces instructor who had survived some of the most dangerous missions of his generation. Her grandfather, Chun Wei-ming, had served in elite units that most people didn't even know existed. He saw something special in his granddaughter from an early age. Sarah's training began when she was just 5 years old. Every morning before school, she would meet her grandfather in the small courtyard behind their house. He taught her not just how to fight, but how to think like a warrior. He showed her how to turn everyday objects into weapons, how to read people's intentions through their body language, and, most importantly, how to remain calm when chaos erupted around her. By the time Sarah was 16, she could disable grown men twice her size without breaking a sweat. Her grandfather's training wasn't just about physical techniques. He taught her about the mind of a warrior, about finding strength in impossible situations, and about the difference between fighting to hurt someone and fighting to survive. These lessons would prove more valuable than she could have ever imagined. When Sarah turned 18, she made a decision that surprised everyone who knew her. Instead of pursuing a traditional career, she enlisted in the military. Not just any military service, but she applied for one of the most elite special operations units in Taiwan's armed forces. The selection process was brutal. Out of 300 applicants, only 12 would be chosen. Sarah was not just chosen, she graduated at the top of her class. Her military service took her to places that don't appear on any public maps. She participated in operations that remain classified to this day. For 6 years, Sarah lived in a world where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death, where she learned to function on no sleep, minimal food, and maximum stress. She became an expert in close-quarters combat, weapons handling, tactical planning, and, most importantly, surviving when everything went wrong. During her service, Sarah met Marcus, a fellow operative who shared her dedication to excellence. They fell in love between missions, finding moments of tenderness in a world full of violence. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant with Emma, she faced the hardest decision of her life. She could continue her military career, or she could give her daughter the stable, peaceful childhood that she herself had never experienced. She chose her daughter. Sarah left the military when Emma was born, but leaving that life behind was more complicated than she'd anticipated. The skills never left her. The awareness never faded. Even while changing diapers and attending parent-teacher conferences, part of her mind remained in tactical mode, automatically assessing exits, potential threats, and defensive positions. It was exhausting, but it was also who she was. When Emma was 3, Marcus was killed during a mission that went wrong. The official report said it was an accident, but Sarah knew better. She also knew that the people responsible might eventually come looking for anyone who knew too much about what had really happened. That's when she made another life-changing decision. She took Emma and disappeared. Using skills learned during her covert operations, Sarah created a new identity for herself and her daughter. They moved to the United States, where Sarah used her technical background to build a career in software engineering. She chose Portland because it was quiet, far from the centers of power where her past might catch up with her. For 5 years, they lived peacefully. Emma started school, made friends, and began to think of America as home. Sarah allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were safe. Sarah maintained her physical condition through what Emma thought were just normal exercise routines. Every morning while Emma slept, Sarah would spend an hour running through combat drills in their garage. She kept her skills sharp not because she expected to need them, but because letting them fade felt like betraying everything her grandfather had taught her. She also kept a small arsenal of weapons hidden throughout their apartment, though she hoped Emma would never discover them. Their apartment was on the third floor of a converted warehouse building. Sarah had chosen it specifically for its tactical advantages. There was only one stairway leading to their floor, making it easy to monitor who was coming and going. The building had thick walls that muffled sound, and their unit had windows facing 3 different directions, providing multiple escape routes if necessary. To Emma, it was just their cozy home. To Sarah, it was a fortress designed to keep them safe. Sarah had also developed relationships with their neighbors, not out of pure friendliness, but as part of her security network. Mrs. Rodriguez in the apartment below was a retired nurse who kept strange hours, making her an ideal early warning system. Tom Chun, no relation despite the shared surname, was a Vietnam veteran who lived across the hall and still had the instincts of a soldier. Without realizing it, these neighbors formed a protective network around Sarah and Emma. But despite all her precautions, Sarah knew that if the right people really wanted to find her, they eventually would. She had protocols in place for that possibility. She had escape routes planned, emergency cash hidden, and backup identities prepared. What she didn't have was a plan for what would happen if they came when she was separated from her weapons. Emma knew nothing about her mother's past. To her, Sarah was just Mom, a woman who worked with computers and made the best pancakes in the world. Emma had noticed that her mother was stronger than other moms, that she could open jars that defeated other adults, and that she had scars on her hands and arms that she said came from accidents when she was younger. But Emma was 8 years old, and 8-year-olds accept their parents as they are without asking too many questions. Sarah's greatest fear wasn't for herself, but for Emma. She had nightmares about her daughter being hurt because of choices Sarah had made years before Emma was even born. This fear drove every security measure, every careful choice about where they lived and how they lived. Sarah would have given anything to guarantee Emma's safety, including her own life. On the night that changed everything, Sarah and Emma were following their usual evening routine. Emma was in her bedroom, supposedly doing homework, but actually reading a fantasy novel under her covers with a flashlight. Sarah was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner, and thinking about a software problem she needed to solve at work the next day. It was a perfectly normal Tuesday evening in what had become a perfectly normal life. Sarah had just finished loading the dishwasher when she heard it, the barely audible sound of someone moving carefully on the stairs leading to their floor. It was after 10 o'clock, too late for any of their neighbors to be coming home, and too quiet to be someone who belonged in the building. Sarah's blood immediately turned to ice, but her hands remained steady. This was the moment she had been preparing for, hoping would never come. Moving silently to the window that faced the street, Sarah peered through the blinds and saw what she'd feared most. A black van parked across the street with its engine running and no lights on. Professional surveillance. This wasn't a random break-in or a case of mistaken identity. Someone had found them, and they had come prepared for a fight. Sarah's mind immediately shifted into the tactical mode she hadn't used in years. She had perhaps 2 minutes before whoever was on the stairs reached their door. Emma was in her bedroom at the far end of the apartment, hopefully still absorbed in her book and unaware of the danger approaching. Sarah's weapons were hidden in strategic locations throughout the apartment, but the closest cache was in the bedroom, which would mean leaving the living area undefended. For a split second, Sarah considered grabbing Emma and trying to escape through the fire escape outside Emma's bedroom window. But that would mean turning their backs on armed intruders, and it would leave them exposed on the outside of the building where the people in the van could easily target them. Sarah made her choice. She would meet the threat head-on, using herself as a barrier between the intruders and her daughter. Moving quickly but silently, Sarah positioned herself behind the heavy wooden door of their apartment. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and let her training take over. Whatever came through that door, she would be ready. She had no way of knowing that in less than 2 minutes, her life would change forever, and that the story of what happened next would be told and retold for years to come. The woman who had spent 5 years trying to be nothing more than a computer programmer and A loving mother was about to remember exactly who she really was. And the four men climbing the stairs toward her apartment were about to learn that some people are far more dangerous than they appear. The sound of footsteps on the stairs grew closer, and Sarah's enhanced hearing, trained through years of dangerous operations, picked up details that would escape most people. 4 sets of boots, moving in perfect synchronization. Professional military cadence. These weren't street criminals or desperate addicts looking for easy money. These were soldiers, and they were moving with the kind of precision that only came from extensive training and careful planning. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside the door, her body automatically falling into a combat stance she hadn't used in years. Her civilian clothes felt strange after so many years, but her muscles remembered exactly what to do. She could hear Emma turning pages in her book, completely unaware of the danger approaching their home. That innocent sound gave Sarah strength and focused her determination. Whatever happened in the next few minutes, Emma would be protected. Through the thin walls of the old building, Sarah could make out whispered communications. The men were using tactical signals, coordinating their approach with military precision. One would take the door, 2 would provide backup, and the 4th would secure their escape route. It was a textbook assault plan, the kind she had executed herself dozens of times during her years in special operations. But Sarah also noticed something that gave her a slight advantage. These men were being too careful, moving too slowly. They were treating this like a high-risk operation against a dangerous target, which meant they knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Their caution was smart, but it was also giving her time to prepare mentally for what was about to happen. Sarah's mind raced through the layout of their apartment, identifying every piece of furniture that could provide cover, every object that could become a weapon, every possible angle of attack. The living room where she now stood had a large coffee table that could be flipped for cover, 2 heavy chairs that could be thrown or used as shields, and a kitchen knife block just 10 feet away. More importantly, her primary weapons cache was hidden behind a false panel in the bedroom closet, but getting there would mean crossing 15 feet of open space. The sound of equipment being readied came through the door. Sarah heard the distinctive click of weapons being checked, the soft whisper of tactical gear being adjusted, and the barely audible beep of electronic devices being activated. These men had come prepared for a serious fight, which meant they either knew about her military background or had learned to take no chances after previous encounters that hadn't gone according to plan. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, centering herself the way her grandfather had taught her when she was still a child. In her mind, she could hear his voice telling her to trust her training, to let her instincts guide her actions, and to remember that the greatest weapon was not in her hands but in her mind. She opened her eyes, and the frightened mother was gone. In her place stood a warrior who had survived battles that would have broken most people. The first breach came exactly as Sarah expected. A small device attached to the door lock, followed by the software of electronic manipulation. These men weren't kicking down doors like common criminals. They were using professional equipment to gain silent entry, hoping to catch their targets completely off guard. Sarah heard the lock mechanism disengage and knew she had perhaps 5 seconds before the door opened. Sarah moved to position herself for maximum tactical advantage. She crouched behind the heavy wooden coffee table, which would provide some cover while giving her a clear view of the door. From this position, she could also reach the kitchen area in 2 quick steps, where both weapons and improvised tools waited. Most importantly, she was positioned between the door and the hallway that led to Emma's bedroom. The door opened slowly, professionally. No dramatic kicks or rushing entries. The first man through was tall and lean, dressed in black tactical clothing, and carrying a weapon that Sarah immediately recognized as a military-grade assault rifle. He moved with the confident precision of someone who had done this many times before, scanning the room methodically while maintaining excellent shooting position. This was no ordinary soldier. This was Special Forces. The second man followed immediately, taking a position that provided overlapping fields of fire with his partner. The third man remained in the doorway, watching their backs and maintaining contact with whoever was coordinating this operation. Sarah noted that the fourth man, who she had heard on the stairs, was not visible, which meant he was either securing the stairwell or positioning himself somewhere else in the building. Professional tactics, perfectly executed. What struck Sarah most was how calm and methodical these men were. There was no anger in their movements, no personal vendetta driving their actions. They were following orders, executing a mission, treating this like just another day at work. That told her important things about who had sent them and why they were here. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. This was about completing an objective, which meant they had specific instructions about what to do with her and Emma. The first man spotted Sarah immediately. Her position behind the coffee table provided some concealment, but these were professionals who knew how to clear a room. Instead of immediately opening fire, however, he raised one hand in a gesture that clearly meant stop, while keeping his weapon trained on her position. He wanted to talk, which confirmed Sarah's suspicion that they had orders to take her alive if possible. Sarah Chun, the man said in accented English that Sarah immediately recognized as Eastern European, possibly Russian. His voice was calm and professional, the tone of someone accustomed to being in control of dangerous situations. We know you're armed. We know what you're capable of. This doesn't have to end badly for anyone, especially your daughter. The mention of Emma sent a spike of pure rage through Sarah's system, but she kept her expression neutral and her breathing controlled. These men knew exactly how to apply psychological pressure, using her greatest vulnerability against her. But they had also just told her something important. They wanted something from her, and Emma was leverage, not a target. That knowledge shifted Sarah's tactical calculations significantly. "What do you want?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She was buying time, letting these men think they were in control while she assessed their equipment, their positions, and their likely next moves. Every second they spent talking was another second for her to prepare for what she knew was inevitable. "Information," the first man replied, taking a small step into the room while his partners maintained their positions. "About certain operations you participated in. About certain people you worked with. About certain locations you visited. Cooperate, and your daughter continues to live her normal life. Resist, and things become much more complicated for both of you." Sarah's mind flashed back to Marcus, to the mission that had gone wrong, to the secrets that had died with him. Someone wanted to know what she knew, and they were willing to break into her home and threaten her child to get that information. But Sarah also knew something these men didn't. The information they wanted could get a lot of good people killed. She would die before giving it to them, but first, she had to make sure Emma was safe. "My daughter doesn't know anything," Sarah said, shifting slightly behind the coffee table to improve her position for what was about to happen. "She's just a child. Whatever you want from me, leave her out of it. That's entirely up to you." The second man spoke for the first time, his accent similar to his partner's. "Come with us quietly, answer our questions completely, and the child remains unharmed. Make this difficult, and we'll be forced to use her to ensure your cooperation." Sarah's grandfather had once told her that there came a moment in every battle when talking stopped and action began. He'd taught her to recognize that moment, to be ready for it, and to act decisively when it arrived. As she looked at these four professional soldiers who had invaded her home and threatened her daughter, Sarah knew that moment had come. "I need a minute to think," Sarah said, slowly raising her hands as if in surrender. The movement drew the attention of all three men in the room, exactly as she intended. None of them noticed her right foot sliding forward into a position that would allow her to spring into action in an instant. "You have 30 seconds, the first man said, glancing at his watch. "Then, we collect you and the child and leave. Your choice how complicated you want to make this." Sarah's hands were raised above her head, her body language suggesting defeat and compliance. But her mind was calculating distances, angles, and timing. The coffee table was solid wood, heavy enough to stop most bullets if she could get it positioned correctly. The first man was 8 feet away, the second man 10 feet, both at slightly different angles that would require separate attack vectors. The third man in the doorway was 12 feet away, but had the clearest shot at her current position. "Okay," Sarah said quietly, as if accepting defeat. "I'll cooperate. Just promise me my daughter won't be hurt." "Smart choice," the first man said, lowering his weapon slightly, but not completely. "Stand up slowly, hands where we can see them." Sarah began to stand, her movements slow and non-threatening. The three men relaxed almost imperceptibly, their attention focused on controlling her surrender rather than watching for signs of resistance. It was the smallest of mistakes, but it was enough. Sarah's grandfather had taught her that battles were won in the tiny gaps between an opponent's attention and action. Sarah was halfway to standing when she exploded into motion. Her left hand slammed down on the coffee table, flipping it toward the first man, while her right hand grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp that had been sitting on the table's surface. The table caught the first man in the legs, throwing off his aim, while the lamp flew toward the second man's head with the accuracy of someone who had spent years learning to turn any object into a weapon. The third man in the doorway began to raise his weapon, but Sarah was already moving. She rolled to her left, using the overturned coffee table as cover while her mind automatically calculated her next 3 moves. Behind her, she could hear Emma's bedroom door opening and her daughter's confused voice asking what was happening. In the space of 2 seconds, Sarah had turned a controlled surrender into chaos. The 4 men who had expected to overwhelm a frightened single mother now found themselves facing someone who moved like liquid death, someone who had just proved that being outnumbered and outgunned didn't mean being defeated. The real fight was just beginning, and Sarah Chun was no longer hiding who she really was. The ceramic lamp struck the second commando directly in the temple with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. Years of training had taught Sarah exactly how much force was needed to incapacitate without killing, and exactly where to aim for maximum effectiveness. The man dropped instantly, his weapon clattering to the floor as his body went limp. 1 down, 3 to go. The first commando, struggling to regain his balance after the coffee table impact, brought his weapon up faster than most people would have thought possible. But Sarah had fought alongside and against some of the best soldiers in the world, and she could read combat movements like other people read books. She saw his intention in the shift of his shoulders, the tightening of his grip, the slight adjustment of his stance. She was moving before he started to aim. Sarah dove forward and to the right, her body moving in a controlled roll that took her behind the kitchen island. Bullets from the first commando's weapon chewed through the space where she had been standing, but Sarah was already planning her next move. The kitchen offered multiple advantages: cover, weapons, and, most importantly, a sight line to the hallway where Emma's frightened voice was still calling out questions. "Stay in your room, baby," Sarah shouted back, her voice carrying the absolute authority that made Emma immediately obey. Years of trust and love gave that command more power than any lock or barrier. Sarah knew Emma would stay put, which freed her to focus entirely on the immediate threat. The third man in the doorway was trying to get a clear shot, but the overturned furniture and his partner's position were blocking his line of sight. Sarah used those precious seconds to reach up and grab the largest knife from the block on the kitchen counter. It wasn't her preferred weapon, but it was sharp, balanced, and in her hands it became as dangerous as any gun. The first commando was advancing cautiously, using professional movement techniques to clear the kitchen area. But he was fighting someone who knew those same techniques and had learned to counter them through years of brutal experience. As he rounded the edge of the kitchen island, Sarah was waiting for him. The knife fight lasted exactly 4 seconds. The commando had training in hand-to-hand combat, but Sarah had something more valuable: desperation fueled by the need to protect her child. She moved like her grandfather had taught her, not fighting the man's strength, but redirecting it, using his own momentum against him. The knife sliced through the tendons in his wrist, causing him to drop his weapon, then found the pressure point in his neck that would render him unconscious for at least 20 minutes. 2 down. The third man in the doorway now had a clear shot, and he was already pulling the trigger as Sarah completed her takedown of his partner. Sarah felt the bullet pass so close to her head that it displaced her hair, striking the kitchen cabinet behind her and sending splinters of wood flying. She had perhaps half a second before the next shot, and nowhere to go. That's when Sarah did something that military instructors still use as an example of unconventional tactical thinking. Instead of trying to take cover or retreat, she grabbed the unconscious body of the first commando and used him as both shield and weapon, throwing his 200-pound frame directly at the man in the doorway with the kind of strength that only comes from years of physical conditioning and absolute desperation. The human projectile struck the third commando low, taking him down in a tangle of limbs and equipment. Both men hit the floor hard, but only Sarah was ready for the impact. She was on the conscious man before he could disentangle himself, using a chokehold that cut off blood flow to his brain. He struggled for almost 15 seconds before going limp, his body joining his unconscious teammates on the living room floor. 3 down, 1 to go. But where was the fourth man? Sarah had heard 4 sets of footsteps on the stairs, but only 3 men had entered her apartment. That meant the last one was either securing their escape route or moving into position for a backup assault. Sarah's tactical mind immediately understood the danger. While she had been fighting the obvious threat, the real danger was maneuvering into position behind her. Sarah moved quickly to the window that faced the fire escape, the the same route she had considered for escape earlier. If the fourth man was professional, he would have anticipated that route and positioned himself to cover it. Sure enough, through the glass Sarah could see a figure crouched on the fire escape landing, weapon trained on Emma's bedroom window. The man had been waiting for them to try to escape, ready to cut them down the moment they appeared. But the fourth man had made a critical error. He was so focused on watching Emma's window that he hadn't noticed Sarah approaching from a different angle. Years of training had taught Sarah how to move silently, how to use shadows and cover to become nearly invisible even when someone was actively looking for her. She opened the window with movements so slow and careful that they wouldn't register in peripheral vision. Sarah was 3 feet behind the fourth man before he realized he was no longer alone. His years of military training kicked in, and he began to turn toward the sound of her movement, but Sarah was already inside his reaction time. Her grandfather had taught her that the most dangerous distance in combat was not across a room or down a hallway, but the 3 feet where skill mattered more than weapons. The final fight was the most dangerous yet. This man was not just professionally trained. He was experienced, battle-tested, and smart enough to have positioned himself for tactical advantage. But he was also fighting on a narrow fire escape platform, 25 feet above the ground, against someone who had just proved she could defeat 3 of his teammates in under a minute. The man tried to bring his weapon around, but Sarah was too close. She grabbed the barrel of his rifle and pushed it away from her body while driving her knee toward his solar plexus. He twisted away from the knee strike and tried to use the rifle as a club, swinging the stock toward her head. Sarah ducked under the swing and used his own momentum to drive him backward against the railing of the fire escape. For a terrifying moment, both fighters were pressed against the railing, struggling for control of the weapon while the metal groaned under their combined weight. The man was stronger than Sarah, but she was faster and more desperate. When he tried to headbutt her, she let him commit to the movement, then stepped aside, allowing his own force to drive his head into the brick wall of the building. The impact stunned him just long enough for Sarah to strip the weapon from his hands and reverse their positions. Now he was the one pressed against the railing, and she was the one in control. But instead of throwing him over the edge or using the rifle to finish him, Sarah chose a different approach. She applied the same chokehold she had used on his partner, cutting off his blood supply until he fell unconscious. For down, Sarah stood alone on the fire escape, breathing hard but uninjured, holding a military-grade assault rifle and surrounded by 4 unconscious commandos. The entire fight had lasted exactly 79 seconds, timed later by investigators who would study the security footage from the building across the street. In less than a minute and 20 seconds, a single mother had defeated 4 professional soldiers without killing any of them. But Sarah's victory celebration lasted exactly 3 seconds, because that's when she heard the sound that made her blood run cold. Vehicles approaching at high speed, their engines roaring as they raced through the quiet residential neighborhood. The men in her apartment had been the assault team, but they weren't the only ones involved in this operation. Backup was arriving, and Sarah was about to face a much larger force. Worse, Emma was still in her bedroom, trapped in an apartment that was no longer safe. Sarah had won the first battle, but the war was just beginning. She had perhaps 2 minutes before the second wave arrived, 2 minutes to figure out how to get herself and her daughter away from people who now knew exactly how dangerous she really was. Sarah climbed back through the window into her apartment, stepping carefully over the unconscious bodies of the men who had threatened her family. The living room looked like a tornado had hit it. Overturned furniture, bullet holes in the walls, blood on the carpet, and weapons scattered across the floor. But Emma's bedroom door was still closed, and Sarah could hear her daughter crying softly on the other side. "Emma, baby, it's okay," Sarah called out, her voice gentle despite the chaos around her. "Mommy needs you to stay in your room just a little bit longer, okay? We're going to play a game." "What kind of game?" Emma's voice was small and frightened, but she was still obeying her mother's instructions. "A hiding game," Sarah replied, already moving to gather weapons and equipment from the fallen commandos. "I need you to pack your special backpack with your favorite things, but be very quiet, okay? Can you do that for Mommy?" The special backpack was part of Sarah's emergency preparations, a go bag that Emma thought was just for camping trips, but was actually designed for rapid escape. It contained clothes, money, identification, and everything they would need to disappear again if this day ever came. Sarah had hoped they would never need it, but she had prepared for this possibility from the moment they arrived in Portland. Outside, The sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder. Sarah estimated at least 3 cars, possibly more, which meant she was about to face a dozen or more hostiles. The apartment that had been their sanctuary was now a trap, and Sarah had to find a way to escape with Emma before the building was surrounded. But, as Sarah gathered weapons and prepared for the next phase of the battle, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not fear, but excitement. For 5 years, she had been hiding, pretending to be someone she wasn't, suppressing the skills and instincts that had kept her alive through countless dangerous situations. Tonight, all pretense was gone. Tonight, Sarah Chun was no longer hiding who she really was. The woman who had entered this fight as a frightened single mother was gone. In her place stood a warrior who had just reminded the world why some people should never be underestimated. And anyone who threatened her daughter was about to learn that the fight they had just witnessed was only the beginning of what Sarah Chun was capable of. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night air as Sarah quickly assessed her tactical situation. She had perhaps 90 seconds before the second wave reached their floor, 90 seconds to transform from a fighter into an escape artist. The weapons and equipment she had taken from the unconscious commandos would help. But her greatest advantage was something these men couldn't have prepared for: intimate knowledge of the building and neighborhood that she had been studying for 5 years. Sarah moved swiftly to Emma's bedroom door, the assault rifle held professionally but pointed safely away from her daughter. When she opened the door, Emma was sitting on her bed, clutching her stuffed elephant, her special backpack beside her. The 8-year-old's eyes were wide with fear, but she had followed her mother's instructions perfectly. Sarah's heart broke at the sight of her frightened child, but there was no time for comfort now. Safety first, explanations later. "Good girl, baby," Sarah said, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "Remember when we used to play pretend games about being secret agents? Tonight we're going to play that game for real, okay? But this time, it's very important that you do exactly what Mommy says, even if it seems scary." Emma nodded solemnly, clutching her elephant tighter. "Are we in danger, Mommy?" Sarah's instinct was to lie, to protect Emma's innocence for as long as possible. But she could hear heavy footsteps already entering the building, and Emma was smart enough to know that something was seriously wrong. More importantly, their survival might depend on Emma understanding the gravity of their situation. "Yes, baby, we are," Sarah said honestly. "But Mommy knows how to keep us safe. I need you to be very brave and very quiet, just like in the movies we watch. Can you do that?" Emma's response surprised Sarah. Instead of crying or asking more questions, her daughter straightened her shoulders and nodded with determination that reminded Sarah powerfully of her own childhood. "I can be brave, Mommy. What do we do?" Sarah felt a surge of pride, even in the midst of their desperate situation. Emma might be only 8 years old, but she had inherited strength from both sides of her family tree. That strength might be the difference between escape and capture in the next few minutes. "We're going to leave through the window," Sarah explained, already moving to Emma's bedroom window that faced the building's interior courtyard. "But first, Mommy needs to make sure the bad people can't follow us." Sarah's preparations over the years had included more than just weapons and escape routes. Hidden throughout the apartment were devices that she had hoped never to use. Small explosive charges designed not to kill, but to delay pursuit and destroy evidence. She activated 3 of them now, setting timers that would give them enough time to escape, but would turn their former home into an impassable obstacle. The charges would bring down sections of the ceiling, block the doorway, and, most importantly, destroy any evidence of how they had lived or where they might go next. Sarah's laptop, their photographs, Emma's school records, anything that could be used to track them would be reduced to scattered debris. In 10 minutes, Sarah Chun and Emma Chun would officially cease to exist. But first, they had to survive the next 10 minutes. The sound of boots on the stairs was closer now, moving faster than the first team had. These men knew their predecessors had failed, which meant they were approaching with much more aggressive tactics. Sarah heard the distinctive sound of equipment being deployed in the hallway: door-breaching charges, communications gear, and what sounded like automated weapons. This second wave wasn't planning to take prisoners. Sarah opened Emma's bedroom window and looked down into the courtyard. It was a 20-foot drop to the roof of the building's garage, manageable for someone with her training, but potentially dangerous for Emma. But Sarah had planned for this possibility too. Hidden behind the windowsill was a compact rappelling system, designed to look like window cleaning equipment to any casual observer. "Emma, I need you to get on my back and Hold on very tight, Sarah said, securing the rappelling gear with practiced efficiency. Close your eyes, and don't let go no matter what happens, okay? We're going to go down to the garage roof, just like when we go down the big slide at the playground. Emma climbed onto her mother's back without hesitation, wrapping her arms around Sarah's neck and her legs around her waist. Sarah could feel her daughter trembling, but Emma remained silent and followed instructions perfectly. The stuffed elephant was tucked securely in Emma's backpack, along with the few possessions that represented their entire life together. The rappelling descent took less than 15 seconds, but it felt like hours. Sarah moved as smoothly as possible to avoid frightening Emma, but she could hear the second assault team reaching their floor just as they touched down on the garage roof. Through the walls of the building, the sound of their apartment door being blown inward echoed like thunder. But instead of finding a defended position, the assault team found an empty apartment with 4 unconscious commandos and furniture arranged to suggest a fierce but concluded battle. It would take them precious seconds to process what they were seeing and more time to realize that their targets had already escaped. Sarah used every one of those seconds. From the garage roof, Sarah and Emma could access a series of connected rooftops that Sarah had mapped out during her early morning runs over the past 5 years. What looked like casual exercise had actually been tactical reconnaissance, identifying routes that could be used for rapid escape if this day ever came. Sarah had memorized every obstacle, every gap between buildings, every potential hiding spot. Hold on tight, baby, Sarah whispered as she began moving across the rooftops with Emma still clinging to her back. We're going to visit some other buildings now, just like parkour in the movies. The journey across the rooftops was a careful balance between speed and safety. Sarah needed to move quickly to stay ahead of pursuit, but she also couldn't risk a fall that would injure Emma or make noise that would reveal their position. Years of physical conditioning served her well as she navigated obstacles with a 40-pound child on her back, moving from building to building through a route that would be invisible from street level. Behind them, Sarah could hear the muffled sound of her apartment's explosive charges detonating. The building shook slightly, and she knew that the stairwell leading to their floor had just become impassable. The assault team was now trapped on the wrong side of a collapsed ceiling, giving Sarah and Emma additional time to increase their lead. 3 buildings away from their former home, Sarah finally allowed them to rest. They were crouched behind an air conditioning unit on the roof of an office building, invisible from the street, but with a clear view of their apartment building. Sarah could see flashlights moving around the building's perimeter as the assault team tried to figure out how their targets had vanished. "Mommy, what's happening?" Emma whispered, finally, giving voice to the questions she had been holding back. Who were those people? Why did they want to hurt us? Sarah held her daughter close, feeling the weight of decisions made years before Emma was born. Her past had finally caught up with them, and now Emma was paying the price for choices she had made as a soldier and operative. But this wasn't the time for detailed explanations or apologies. Right now, survival was the only priority. "Some people think Mommy knows something important," Sarah said carefully. "They wanted to ask me questions, but they weren't very nice about it. So we had to leave our home to stay safe." "Are we going to get a new home?" Emma asked, and the simple question nearly broke Sarah's heart. At 8 years old, Emma was already learning that safety was temporary, that home was something that could be taken away without warning. It was a lesson Sarah had hoped her daughter would never need to learn. "Yes, baby, we'll find a new home," Sarah promised. "But first we need to make sure those people can't find us again. We're going to take a little trip, just the 2 of us. Would you like that?" Emma nodded against her mother's shoulder, and Sarah felt some of her tension ease. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Emma was safe, they were free, and Sarah still had resources and skills that could keep them both alive. But their old life was over, ended as definitively as if those explosive charges had destroyed more than just an apartment. From their position on the office building roof, Sarah watched as emergency vehicles began arriving at their former home. Fire trucks, police cars, and ambulances lit up the night with red and blue lights. To anyone watching, it would look like a gas explosion or structural collapse had damaged the building. The unconscious commandos would be treated as injured civilians, assuming they were even found in the wreckage. But Sarah knew that whoever had sent those men wouldn't be fooled by the cover story. They would realize that their mission had failed, that their target had escaped, and that 4 of their best operatives had been defeated by a single woman. That knowledge would make the next phase of pursuit much more dangerous, but it would also make them more cautious about underestimating their prey. Sarah's phone, which she had been careful to keep turned off during the fight, now showed 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Someone was trying very hard to reach her, which meant word of what had happened was already spreading through networks that existed in the shadows between nations. By morning, her picture would be circulating among people who specialized in finding those who didn't want to be found. But Sarah had advantages that her pursuers didn't know about. Hidden bank accounts, fake identities, and safe houses that existed off any official records. Resources that she had accumulated during her military service and maintained through careful planning over the past 5 years. Tonight had cost her the quiet life she had built, but it hadn't left her helpless. "Are you ready for an adventure, Emma?" Sarah asked, beginning to plan their route away from Portland and toward the first of several safe houses that could provide temporary shelter. "I'm ready, Mommy," Emma replied with the kind of trust that only children can give their parents. "As long as we're together." Sarah hugged her daughter tighter and began moving toward the fire escape that would take them down to the alley behind the office building. Their new life was beginning right now, in the darkness between one building and another, with nothing but their love for each other and Sarah's determination to keep Emma safe. The woman who had once been a deadly operative was now a mother on the run, but she was also something more dangerous than she had ever been before, a parent protecting her child. And anyone who threatened Emma would discover that there was no force more dangerous than a mother who would do anything to keep her daughter safe. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Sarah and Emma were living in a small cabin in the mountains of Montana, far from the urban centers where surveillance networks could easily track their movements. To their few neighbors, they were simply Anna and Sophie Matthews, a mother and daughter who had moved to the area for a quieter life after a difficult divorce. No one suspected that the woman who chopped firewood with unusual precision and the girl who could navigate mountain trails like a seasoned hiker were living under assumed identities. But the quiet life was an illusion that Sarah maintained through constant vigilance. Every morning while Emma slept, Sarah would check the perimeter of their property for signs of surveillance. Every evening, she would monitor communications frequencies for chatter that might indicate their location had been discovered. She had turned their remote cabin into a fortress that looked like a simple family home, complete with hidden weapons caches, escape routes, and early warning systems. Emma had adapted to their new life with the resilience of childhood, but Sarah knew the experience had changed her daughter in fundamental ways. Emma no longer took safety for granted. She automatically looked for exit routes when they entered buildings, spoke quietly in public places, and never mentioned their life in Portland to anyone they met. At 9 years old, she was learning skills that Sarah hoped she would never need, but that might someday save her life. The identity of their attackers had remained a mystery for months, despite Sarah's efforts to trace them through old contacts in the intelligence community. The 4 men who had assaulted their apartment had vanished from hospital records after receiving treatment for their injuries, suggesting that powerful people were working to erase all evidence of what had happened. But Sarah's patience and investigative skills eventually paid off. The breakthrough came through an encrypted message from someone signing themselves only as Phoenix, sent to one of Sarah's old military email accounts that she checked monthly. The message contained a single photograph: Marcus, Sarah's former partner, and Emma's father, very much alive, and sitting in what appeared to be a military briefing room. The man Sarah had mourned for 6 years, whose death had driven her into hiding, was not only alive, but apparently working with people who had enough resources to track down a former special operations soldier who had gone to extraordinary lengths to disappear. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. Marcus's death had been staged, which meant everything she had believed about why they were in danger was wrong. The people who had attacked their apartment weren't seeking information about classified operations. They were looking for her specifically, and Marcus was somehow involved in directing that search. The man she had loved, the father of her child, had been hunting them for years. But the photograph also told Sarah something else. Whoever Phoenix was, they had access to intelligence networks that could penetrate whatever organization Marcus was now working for. This wasn't just someone offering information. This was someone offering alliance. After months of running and hiding, Sarah had found a potential ally in a war she was only beginning to understand. Sarah's response to Phoenix was brief: meeting, terms, timeline. She wasn't ready to trust anyone completely, but she needed information more than she needed safety. Emma deserved to know the truth about her father, and Sarah deserved to understand why their quiet life had been shattered by people who should have left them alone years ago. The meeting was arranged for a public location in Seattle, 3 hours' drive from their mountain cabin. Sarah left Emma with Mrs. Peterson, an elderly neighbor who thought she was babysitting while Anna attended a job interview in the city. Emma knew better than to ask too many questions, but Sarah could see concern in her daughter's eyes as she kissed her goodbye. Sarah arrived at the designated coffee shop 40 minutes early, using the time to conduct surveillance and identify potential threats. She chose a table that gave her clear sight lines to all entrances while keeping her back to a solid wall. The woman who entered at exactly the agreed-upon time was not what Sarah had expected. Phoenix was Asian, approximately Sarah's age, with a kind of controlled posture that suggested military background. She was dressed professionally but not expensively, and she moved through the coffee shop with the casual awareness of someone accustomed to potentially dangerous situations. When she sat down across from Sarah, her first words immediately established her credibility. "Your real name is Chun Wailing," Phoenix said quietly. "You served in the 707th Special Mission Group under the operational designation Falcon. Your partner Marcus Webb was reported killed during Operation Nightingale, but the body recovered from the mission site was not his. You have one daughter, Emma, born in 2016. You've been living under the identity Sarah Chun for 5 years, most recently in Portland, Oregon, until you were forced to relocate after defeating 4 Spetsnaz operatives in hand-to-hand combat." Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was impressed by the accuracy and detail of Phoenix's information. This woman knew things that were supposed to be buried in classified files accessible only to the highest levels of government intelligence agencies. Either Phoenix was working for one of those agencies, or she had found ways to penetrate their security that suggested exceptional skills and resources. "Your turn," Sarah replied. "Who are you, and what do you want?" "My name is Jennifer Liu," Phoenix replied. "I'm a former analyst for the CIA who discovered that certain operations were being conducted without proper oversight or authorization. When I tried to report these activities through official channels, I found myself targeted for elimination. I've been operating independently for the past 3 years, gathering evidence of illegal activities conducted by a shadow organization that operates within multiple government agencies." Jennifer slid a tablet across the table, showing Sarah a series of photographs and documents that made her blood run cold. There was Marcus, clearly alive and apparently healthy, meeting with individuals she recognized from intelligence briefings years earlier. There were financial records showing payments for operations that had no official authorization. Most disturbing of all, there were surveillance photographs of Sarah and Emma taken over the past several years, proving that their location had been known long before the night of the attack. "Marcus isn't working voluntarily," Jennifer continued. 2 years ago, this shadow organization convinced him that you and Emma were dead, killed in a terrorist attack that they claimed he failed to prevent. They've been using his guilt and his desire for revenge to make him track down everyone who worked with him on classified operations, under the pretext of preventing future attacks. Sarah studied the documents, her analytical mind processing implications and connections. "They're using him to clean up loose ends. People like me who know too much about operations that officially never happened." "Exactly," Jennifer confirmed. "But they made a mistake when they sent those men to your apartment. They expected to capture or kill a former operative who had gone soft after years of civilian life. Instead, they lost 4 experienced soldiers to someone who proved she's still extremely dangerous. Now they know you're not just a loose and to be quietly eliminated. You're a threat that requires serious resources to neutralize." The revelation that Marcus was alive and being manipulated changed everything for Sarah. The anger she felt at his perceived betrayal was replaced by a different kind of fury, rage at the people who had torn apart their family and turned the man she loved into an unwitting weapon against his own child. But it also opened possibilities that hadn't existed an hour earlier. "What do you propose?" Sarah asked. Jennifer's answer was simple and dangerous. "We expose them. All of them. We gather enough evidence to bring down the entire network, and we make sure Marcus learns the truth about who's really responsible for the attacks that drove you into hiding." It was a plan that would put both Sarah and Emma at enormous risk. Going on the offensive against a shadow organization with resources that spanned multiple governments would make them high-priority targets for elimination. But it would also end the running and hiding that had defined their lives for the past 6 months. More importantly, it offered Emma the chance to have a relationship with her father if Marcus could be rescued from the lies that had turned him against his own family. Sarah thought about her daughter, growing up without knowing her father was alive, learning to live in constant fear because of secrets from a war she had never chosen to be part of. I'll need guarantees, Sarah said. Safe houses for Emma, extraction protocols if things go wrong, and absolute proof that Marcus is being manipulated rather than choosing to work against us. Already arranged, Jennifer replied, producing another tablet with detailed operational plans. I've been preparing for this alliance for months, ever since I learned about the failed operation against you. Emma will be protected by people who specialize in keeping children safe from exactly this kind of threat. Sarah spent the next 2 hours reviewing Jennifer's evidence, operational plans, and safety protocols. The scope of the Shadow Organization's activities was staggering. Dozens of unauthorized operations, millions of dollars in untracked funding, and a network of assets that included current and former military personnel from multiple nations. Taking them down would require precision, patience, and skills that Sarah hadn't used in years. But as she studied the photographs of Marcus, Sarah saw something in his eyes that she recognized. The hollow look of someone carrying enormous guilt and pain. The man she had loved was still there, buried under layers of manipulation and false information. Rescuing him might be possible, but it would require destroying the people who had turned him into their unwilling weapon. When Sarah returned to Montana that evening, Emma was waiting up despite her late bedtime. Her daughter's first question was direct and serious. Are we going to keep running forever? Sarah sat down beside Emma on their small couch, considering how much truth a 9-year-old could handle. Maybe not forever, baby. I met someone today who might be able to help us find a way to stop running and start fighting back. Fighting back against the people who want to hurt us? Emma asked. Fighting back against the people who have been hurting a lot of families, not just ours, Sarah replied. But it would be dangerous, and we would have to be very careful and very brave. Emma was quiet for several minutes, staring into the fireplace where logs crackled and sent shadows dancing across the walls of their temporary home. When she spoke again, her words showed wisdom that no child should have to develop. I don't want to be scared anymore, Mommy, Emma said. I want to go home, but I want it to be a real home where bad people can't find us. If fighting back is the only way to get that, then we should fight back. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, feeling pride and heartbreak in equal measure. Emma was growing up too fast, learning lessons about courage and justice that most adults never face. But she was also developing the kind of strength that could carry her through whatever challenges lay ahead. Then, we'll fight back together, Sarah promised. But first, I have something to tell you about your father. As Sarah began to explain that Marcus was alive, that he had been tricked into working against them, and that they might be able to save him, Emma's eyes filled with hope for the first time since the night they had fled Portland. The family that had been torn apart by lies and manipulation might finally have a chance to heal, but first they would have to survive a war against enemies who had already proved they would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. The woman who had defeated 4 Commandos in 79 seconds was about to discover that the real fight was just beginning. But this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone.